Box Media, news and information for the soul. Please subscribe to Rainy Box Media, like and share your views in the comment section. Thank you.
The thing that has made the so-called Negro in America fail more so than any other thing is your and my lack of knowledge concerning history. We know less about history than anything else. There are black people in America who have mastered the mathematical sciences, have become professors and experts in physics, are able to toss Sputnik out there in the atmosphere, out in space. They're masters in that field. We have black men who have mastered the field of medicine.
Netflix has finally released the Cleopatra docuseries, and apparently, supposedly, it didn't do very well. Now, to bring you up to speed, Egypt itself is planning on suing the producer that produced the docuseries for Cleopatra because they depicted her as black. Now, make this make sense. All of Africa was black, so get over it. Africa was invaded by the Persians, the Greeks, and then the Arabs. Point blank and period. Those are historical facts. But what they don't talk about...
And we don't have the real thing, but we've got the next best thing, which is a very exact replica.
Cool.
And this is where it should be.
May we touch it?
Yeah, of course.
It's
Of course.
No, it's cool.
This is really cool, yeah.
Brilliant. Perfect.
It's really like looking in her face. Yeah. But this is quite another thing, to have the skull of her in your hands. Yes. This is a really enormous big feeling. Wow.
Well, it was worth bringing in.
Definitely home.
Yeah.
Yes.
The forensic team are convinced they've proved beyond doubt that these are the bones of Princess Arsinoe. But rebuilding the skull has unlocked an incredible secret about her ancestry. Until recently, Cleopatra's dynasty was thought to be Greek, European, Caucasian. But some scholars now believe Cleopatra and her siblings had African blood. Could the answer be in this skull?
The distance from the forehead to the back of the skull is long in relation to the overall height of the cranium, and that's something that you see quite frequently in certain populations, one of which is ancient Egyptians. Another would be black African groups will also show that characteristic. This one certainly looks more white European, but it has got this long head shape. It could suggest a mixture of ancestry.
Our revelation backs up the controversial theory that the princess, and therefore her sister Cleopatra, also had African blood.
From Morocco to Egypt, the indigenous black tribes are still there. They're still there. And to act as if she couldn't possibly be black because the Greeks, who they claim Cleopatra was Greek, even though none of the artifacts in Africa, in Egypt, depict her as white. The only artifacts that depict her as white are the ones that the Greeks made. That's it. So get over it.
Hey guys, so I've been running my Egyptian jewelry brand for about 3 years now, and if you've been following me on TikTok, you know that every time a TikTok goes viral where I mention that I'm Egyptian, I get a lot of hate. And it's I don't know, I'm laughing, it's not funny, it's serious. Yeah, I get a lot of hate, and it is from Egyptians telling me that I'm not Egyptian, which is fun. It's what everyone wants to hear. In the beginning, I used to get really upset. I didn't even know that we had a slur for black people in Egypt before I started TikTok. Like, I lived such a naive life. I remember the first time somebody used the slur on me, I literally went to my mom and I thought they were calling me like zesty, like exotic. And I went to her and I was like, what does this mean? And she was like, oh. I was like, oh. The reason I do reply to these videos now is not to say I'm upset. And it's not out of anger or like being hurt or anything like that. It's more so that we can keep this conversation in the spotlight to show people that, yeah, racism is bad in Egypt. Like, it's really bad. Like, it's awful. Something I want to make very clear. One, not all Egyptians are racist, so don't come in the comments being like, Egyptians are the worst, blah, 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 because no. So this is the thing. The racism I get is from Egyptians back home, not in the diaspora. But the Egyptians back home are well aware that Black Egyptians exist. They know about Nubians. They know about Aswan. Like, they know that darker skinned Egyptians are around, more so than Egyptians in the diaspora. But the thing is, we are not represented. They're used to seeing white Egyptians represent them, even on TikTok. And I have not seen Egyptians that look like me with a platform on TikTok. So when they see a dark-skinned Egyptian being successful and claiming to be Egyptian, no way. The audacity of this girl to try and claim that she's Egyptian, because we don't let people like you succeed. One time, somebody tried to apologize for the racism I experienced in Egypt by saying, but I mean, don't be upset about the racism. It's just because they don't expect Nubians to do well. Like, are we sure that's how we would apologize? So I'm just hoping by me continually bringing these videos to the spotlight, maybe other people can start talking about racism too that it is in Egypt, because I know that every single Egyptian is aware of the racism in Egypt. Not one Egyptian can come and tell me that there isn't racism in Egypt and it's not a huge problem, because they would be lying. For Ramadan? But yeah, so I'm gonna keep making these videos just to make sure that this conversation doesn't stop and that it is something that we can work towards.
So Adele James, who plays Cleopatra in the controversial Netflix documentary, has responded to the many Egyptian people calling her out for not playing a correct depiction of Cleopatra, and this is what she had to say. Yeah, she called Egyptian people racist and said that all people who say that Cleopatra wasn't black are fundamentally racist. This was actually targeted towards Egyptian people because the Egyptian government is actually trying to sue her and sue Netflix because they portrayed her as being black and portrayed a false depiction of Egyptian culture. This is like ridiculous. I don't know how she can come out and say the Egyptian people are racist for defending their own culture, but I guess that's the world we live in nowadays.
What is profound about it is that they claim that the Greeks go over into Egypt. And the reason that Cleopatra could not possibly have any black ancestry in her is because they only engaged and created offspring through, I guess, other Greeks within their Greek tribe or whatever. Make that make sense. So the same thing goes, and it makes me think about it, with the British royal family. They're only supposed to create offspring and marry those of royal so-called blue blood, right? So 100 years from now, even though Prince Harry has married Meghan, because Meghan has an ambiguous look, if Europeans and others that are not black are still in control of history books and texts, they're going to claim that Meghan Markle's mother was not black. Make that make sense, because that's exactly what's happening. Europe is known to be a white area of the world. Egypt is not. And the tribes that are indigenous, I repeat, that are black are still there. They're just ignored. And I'm going to show you in this video how much they are ignored. Fast forward, one of the renowned anthropologists found that Cleopatra's mother had to be black through testing. But because it's not what they want to hear about black people, they have decided to ignore this anthropologist. Before she did that study of who Cleopatra's mom had to be and presented her findings, which, by the way, she still stands on. I think her name is Thur, T-H-U-R, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, she's European, of European descent. Before she did those findings, she was considered to be world renowned. And I'm assuming she's still considered to be world renowned as an anthropologist. But they want to turn around and discredit her, or at least discredit this particular work where Cleopatra's mom is known to have African ancestry. both white people and the Persians, and I'm referring to Persians as I gave you the breakdown, as those Egyptians that are in Egypt now. They're modern Egyptians. They do not represent ancient Egypt. Every single time they find that these pharaohs and queens are black, they ignore it and they move around the plains trying to discredit. It doesn't matter if the archaeologists
are Egyptologists lying about ancient Egypt. In 2012, Zahi Hawass and the Egyptian government conducted research on Ramses III's mummy. It was the first study of this quality on royal mummies. They discovered that the king was murdered through a plot fomented by one of his wives. The results were widely publicized, but some key details remained hidden. The relationship between the king and a nearby mummy was determined using genetic kinship analyses. The man was Ramses' son. Both were Y-DNA-E1B1 carriers, the most common haplogroup in Black Africa. Surprisingly, that info never made the news. Something unusual, since they've been flooding us with studies on non-royal mummies lately. A decade later, Zahi Hawass admitted that the skulls and complexions of Kemites resembled those of Black Africans.
The skull could be looks like African. No, they were dark skinned, but they were not black. But they're not bigger.
And we now know he is aware that many Egyptian pharaohs were genetically linked to Black Africans. Regardless, he insists that they were not black. So, yes, experts are lying about Kemet.
or anthropologists is black or white. They move around trying to discredit it. To say that a group of people, the Greeks, invade Africa, go into Egypt and rule for 300 years or so, which is not that ancient, by the way. Okay, it's not ancient at all. Doesn't even match the timeline, but nonetheless. And that they only created offspring with one another, with only that particular tribe of family, is ludicrous. But as I said before, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are married, and Prince Harry comes from Europe, if I'm not mistaken. The British monarch is in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. That's a known white land. Egypt and Africa is not, from Morocco to Timbuktu. So get over it. And all we're hearing about is how both the Middle Easterns and white Europeans are upset. This will not be the first time in history that Europeans, and particularly Europeans, have confiscated and taken credit for the history of others. But as I pointed out earlier, Meghan Markle is partially black. Her mother is clearly black. And yet they have arguments as to whether or not she is a princess. Of course not. The family doesn't exactly acknowledge their children the way that they should in terms of the rumors, and the list goes on and on. So you're trying to tell me, and anyone out there is trying to say, that Cleopatra is not at least partially black. In my opinion, she's 100% black, period. Because they still do not want to explain how there are black Greeks in Greece, and they've been there since before the Ottoman Empire. Every single time a black group of people has a great marker in history, they always seem to migrate there or be there because they were slaves. Really? Not.